Hi, my name is John, and this is my 12-volt electric power wheel that I made to move our camper around. I'd like to explain how I did it. There, just have to tighten the bolts down.
Alright, here's how I built my power wheel. First, a list of components. A 12 volt, 1 horsepower winch rated at 2,000 pounds pulling capacity. I bought it online from a national wholesaler for $48. Now the winch came with a wired remote control assembly, and I chose to have a wireless remote instead, so I bought a wireless remote assembly for a little over $23. A swing back trailer jack with swivel wheel that folds horizontally and locks for towing. Cost a little under $20. A number 35 chain. It came only in a 10-foot length, and the cost of that was $24. A 3.5-inch sprocket to fit the number 35 chain, and this sprocket is attached to the spool of the winch motor. The cost $12. 6-inch sprocket that's attached to the wheel, $33. An 8-inch wheel with a 5/8 roller bearing. It has a 2-inch solid tire with a durometer hardness of 70, which is good because it's soft enough for traction yet hard enough for long wear. Cost just under $30. I also purchased a hub that I used as a spacer and an adapter to bolt the wheel and the 6-inch sprocket together. The cost $19. Miscellaneous nuts, bolts, and wires about $25. So the total cost, not including the battery, is $234, and I would estimate my time at about 30 hours of hobby time. So here's that list of parts.
One of the first things I did was remove the chain or the cable from the winch. So we took the cable off, and then I've got to get this sprocket onto the drum. I'm using a number 35 chain. The drum is 1¼ inches in diameter, and the sprocket had a smaller hole, so I just reamed that out very carefully with a reamer to make sure it's still centered. What I have to do next is remove this part of the hub, or the spool, to slide the sprocket on. So we've got to take this apart. There's a pin that holds the free spooling in. I took a small screwdriver, I ground it down to a small diameter, and I use that to punch the pin out, and also makes it very easy to extract this because it has a handle on it. The next thing we'll do is remove this bracket around it, take the screwdriver out or the pin out, and pull the spool out and cut that down. I will use a reciprocating saw, and then I'll put it on a bench grinder to just make sure it's nice and round. Alright, the bracket is off. It just had a couple screws holding it in, and by removing the bracket, the spool came out easily. Alright, time to take this project out into the garage. Okay, here we are in the garage. The spool has been taken off of the motor, and I will cut and grind this end of the spool off so that I can slip the sprocket over it. And then with spacers, I will bolt the sprocket to this end of the spool. The reason you need the spacers is to give you plenty of room for the chain to clear. Alright, the next step is attaching the small 3.5-inch sprocket to the spool of the winch. I just simply drilled holes here. They're recessed enough so there won't be any binding when it fits onto the motor. And this side I just use number 10 32 screws and use 1/4-inch nuts and a flat washer for a spacer. This is set up for the jack. I'm going to change a little bit. I'm going to bend these two ears flat so that I can bolt the jack to this framing anchor. Alright, well, we got the two ears that formerly were bent over to hold the little wheel. They're bent over, and it was not too bad of a project. I just put the pipe in a vise. You won't bend a pipe. And I took a pipe wrench and bent them. You can see it's actually pretty straight. I bent it over most of the way, and then I just took a 2-pound light sledgehammer and a beat up old framing hammer, used it as a hammer and dolly. This is the fork assembly that holds the wheel. It's bolted to the bracket that will hold the winch. And it's all bolted to the caster.
Before we go any further, I'd like to point out that the wheel that you see in most of this production is a black wheel, which did not work. It was an inferior wheel. The wheel was not attached to the tire at all, and the only thing it did was spin. So I thought I could save some money by buying a $12 wheel. And I ended up buying a second wheel for $30, which is a great wheel. The tire is vulcanized to the wheel itself. It's got a 5/8-inch roller bearing, and it works great. The construction of this whole power wheel is exactly the same. So, and you'll see towards the end that the green one works great. But the building of the wheel is exactly the same as if either the black wheel or the green wheel.
So our next step is to mount this hub, bolt it to the wheel. Takes a little bit of drilling, a little bit of fitting. Okay, here's our wheel, 8-inch wheel with hub attached, bolted to the wheel. And there's our 6-inch sprocket, and there's a hub that I put on top. Not really necessary, but it's got a 5/8 hole in it, and I'm using a 5/8 bolt for axle, so it helps stabilize it a little bit. But there's many ways to attach a sprocket to a wheel. This is the way I did it. There's the sprocket bolted to the wheel, and you can see the spacers, which actually are just 1/4-inch nuts, but spacers are used to get that sprocket away from the tire to allow plenty of room for the chain. Also an 8-inch wheel, 6-inch sprocket. There's a little over 1-inch clearance between the sprocket and the tire, so the chain will not get jammed on the ground. Okay, here we are, ready for assembly. We've got the wheel with the sprocket mounted and a chain. The chain, by the way, I used a number 35 chain. Also, kind of hard to get it to fit exactly. I ended up getting a half link for a final adjustment, and there it is, and that worked fine. So we got the 8-inch wheel, 6-inch sprocket, 5/8 axle. There is the half of the spool with the smaller sprocket bolted to it, and there's the spline that will be turned and fit into this part of the motor. And the motor will be bolted to the bracket that came with it, this lower part here. The rest of it is made up by me. I sanded it and put a coat of paint on. So we've got the wheel, the smaller sprocket fitting into the motor fits into here, and this will be bolted to the base. This is a little steering mechanism that will be bolted on. I've got a 3/4, this is a 1/2 inch square bolted to it, and I've got a 3/4 inch square that fits over it. A little more about that later, and a little bracket to bolt it on. This is the assembly for the wireless remote. The wires, I just tested it, everything works. This is the wireless button, forward and reverse. That's pretty cool. Well, there she is, ready to bolt in. The wheel, the sprocket, the motor, the jack to raise it up and down, our little steering arm, steering rod receptacle, ready to bolt to the frame. This is all bolted in place. I used a cotter pin. I drilled a hole through the nut and the bolt, which is my axle, and I put a couple washers in there just so that it would roll a little easier. I'm going to see if I could get a shot of that. There's one washer. There's the other two underneath. I'll get a better shot later. Anyway, what I did, I tightened the nut down on the bolt so that we would have some good clearance, but not binding. And then when I got the right amount of tension, I put the cotter pin.
Here's the good wheel.
Alrighty, here's my new wheel. I replaced it. It's a good one. Got a nice roller bearing in it. The old wheel didn't work. I tried to save some money. I bought this one for under $10, I think. $12. But when I tried it, the sprocket, everything turned okay, but the tire stayed on the ground. The center of the wheel was spinning on the tire. So I ordered a new one, put it on. Excellent wheel, same diameter. It was not much to change out. What I did do, however, it came smooth like a slick. So I cut grooves in it for a little bit of traction, and the duct tape's not holding it together. It's holding up my free spooling pin. So everything works okay. I'm gonna bolt this baby back on my A-liner and give it a try. Okay, I mounted the power wheel onto the frame of the camper. I think I'll back up and give you a look at what we have. It is a 15-foot A-liner pop-up with hard size. It weighs, with the things inside, frying pans and things like that, about 1,200 pounds. So I hooked up a temporary battery and tested it, and it does work. So now what I did, I put in the battery box for the battery specifically for the power wheel. I mounted the relay. And what I did as a safety precaution is I put in a disconnect switch, just an ordinary electrical switch. It breaks the power just in case, whatever, I can shut it down. So this is a deep cycle battery is going in the battery box. Another thing I did to keep this thing charged, this battery charged, I connected wires from my harness into the trailer. Again, this is just a nice little option. So when I'm towing it or when it's plugged in, the battery inside the camper is being charged as well as this battery. So that's pretty cool. You don't have to hook up a separate charger. So my next step is going to be to put the battery in the battery box and also do some final wiring on the power wheel itself, on the winch motor, tie it up, secure it, get everything to work free and look pretty. There's the battery all hooked up.